Hey everyone, Tad Larkin here, better known as Captain Fordo here on this channel, but on my lore channel, I'm Tad Larkin. Um, yeah, it's been a while. I'm here back because fellow named Corey's Datapad, who is an influential YouTuber as well as excellent Star Wars Empire at War mod creator, made a video claiming that the controversy of TCW overwriting the pretty much entire expanded universe wasn't overblown. And yeah, I commented on the video. Just a couple of laughy faces. Yeah, see? There I am. And time to actually like pick this apart. Maybe there'll be things I agree with, maybe there'll be things I don't agree with. I don't know. I haven't watched the whole thing yet, but we're gonna do that together. And this is, I know I said after the last TCW doesn't fit video that I wasn't gonna do this anymore, and this is like the last time. But I'm only really doing this shit because I got called out, which is not even really. he's like, I hope you're up to the challenge, and I'm like it's a fucking challenge. But we'll we'll get into this. But before I do this, I want to preface this with a script that I had wrote for a let's see. I want to preface this with a script that I wrote for a third why TCW doesn't fit in Legends video that has never been released, will never been released. This is a very rough draft. Like it hasn't even finished. There's just some like points in here and stuff like that. But I want to preface this because there's been a lot of controversy, and it's just like, I make the joke that I'm Orange Mandalorian bad, because a lot of people in the Star Wars fandom don't like my take, and they've labeled me a lot of things, and I'm here to kind of just put that to rest here before we start. Just trying to find the part I wanted to start. Okay, here's where I wanted to start. Alright, this kind of just gives a little background. Alright, so this is talking about the first two why TCWs doesn't fit in Legends, which if you're watching this video, you've probably seen them. Alright, so since these videos first came out, my critics have claimed that I'm this big TCW hater and that I think the show sucks and that it's garbage and that everybody who likes it is stupid and has no taste. And not only are these critics completely missing the point altogether, but they're frankly quite wrong. And let's be real with ourselves here, they're just saying these things in a sad attempt to shake the validity of my points. I was a huge fan of the show in my younger days, and even still as an adult, somewhere deep down in my tiny, jaded, ice-coated, and probably cholesterol-encrusted heart, there is still a love for the show. I'll even go one step further and argue that the reason for all these criticisms I have for it come from the fact that I have loved it so much that I was immensely disappointed to see the path it went down, given the resources they had to make it an even greater part of the saga and truly fit within it. I can remember when I was 13 first seeing the promos for the TCW movie and how extremely excited I was, and after rewatching the OG Clone Wars series on crappy Bandicam recordings on YouTube, I begged my father to take me to see it. And in the meantime, rereading all of my old Clone Wars comics and getting ready for the experience. When the day finally came, I thoroughly enjoyed the film, albeit I was a bit confused as to where exactly in the timeline the film took place, but I enjoyed it nonetheless, and even rewatched it numerous times on Comcast On Demand a year later. This being said, I didn't like Ahsoka. I found her quite annoying, and she never really grew on me as the creators intended. I remember hoping that by the end of the film, it was just some bureaucratic error, and that she was Plo Koon's Padawan instead of Anakin's. I paraphrased that because I didn't write this well. Again, this is a rough draft of stuff that will never become a video anyway. But she didn't bother me enough to stop. She didn't bother me enough to stop me from watching the show when it came out. and I awaited with great anticipation every week to catch the next episode. Even to this day, Rookies from Season 1 remains my all-time favorite episode. And it was the first all-cloned themed episode, and it was my first time hearing a cartoon character utter the word hell. It really made me think the show was going to mature and not be just some Saturday morning cartoon. As the show progressed, though, they started getting braver and braver with playing with the continuity, and as a kid who grew up reading the Republic Commando novels and playing Knights of the Old Republic, and being a huge fan of the Mandalorians, betrayed is really the only way I can describe how I felt in Season 2, when they retconned the Mandalorians into being pacifists, which is not at all what they were in the old expanded universe, which was still canon at the time. I continued watching, but I was growing weary, and by the end of Season 3, I came to the realization that they weren't adding to the Star Wars saga and expanding the universe, they were overwriting it, and I grew increasingly fearful, not only for the Clone Wars multimedia project stories that I grew up reading, but I knew that more shows like it would be made after TCW eventually concluded, and I was fearful for the rest of the expanded universe and the stories that I knew and loved. Well, we all know how that turned out. This overwhelming fear, combined with the underwhelming impact of a majority of the filler episodes, many of which I can only really describe as cringy, really kind of turned me off from the show. And by Season 4, I wasn't even watching for enjoyment anymore. I was watching to see what they changed every week. Admittedly, it wasn't healthy, but I continued to watch the show get more and more ridiculous to the point where it even began contradicting the movies. Yeah, so I guess it was hate watching before we had the word for it. Now, in the aspect of cringe, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt. My problems were with the filler episodes for the most part, not the 3-episode-long story arcs. Those they put effort into, and I was also getting older. As when the series started, I was about 13, 14, and when it was canceled, I was about 17, 18, freshly graduated from high school. Tastes change, but even going back and watching some of the older episodes that I loved, even though the action sequences were cool, I couldn't help but focus on the dialogue and how some of the things the characters said just would make me visibly wince. When the EU novels started following the show, and I'm not talking about the direct tie-in novels that I could easily dismiss and ignore, mind you, I'm talking about the books like the Fate of the Jedi series, the situation became alarming. I'll get into that in a bit, most likely, because that will be brought up in Corey's video here. This is just what I wrote several years ago. The situation became alarming. The change I was fearing was slowly taking place, and Star Wars was beginning to go down a path I couldn't follow, and by TCW's cancellation in 2012, I admittedly felt relief with a tinge of melancholy. TCW couldn't damage or retcon my favorite stories anymore, but at the same time, it ended on an unfinished, sour note for me. The joke was on me, though, because Season 6 ended up being a thing and messed up even more of my stories, but it is what it is. Season 7, having connections to Star Wars Rebels, is purely Disney canon with zero connection to the expanded universe whatsoever, and so I have refused to watch it. Okay, that I'm going to get into too, because no doubt that might come into play in Corey's video here. So no, I don't hate nor have I ever hated TCW. I was just disheartened at the direction it took and how it left the EU a complete mess before the eventual decanonization. Now, Corey's probably going to use the point that the expanded universe was always a mess, which I have debunked in several other videos, but I'll go through again here to kind of justify why TCW can take a big dump on the continuity, which, again, I will get into. So these myths about me being a hater are all false, and you know it just goes on. It's all right. But yeah, just wanted to give that little preface. So now let's get into this. I'm probably going to be pausing a lot. Hopefully this doesn't take forever. I don't have a lot of time, but at least recording this versus doing a live stream like I was originally planning, I can come back to this whenever I want and chop it up. I don't have to sit there and do the whole thing in 3 hours. But before we go, I'm sporting our home team here on my shirt, the OG Clone Wars. So without further ado, let's get this shit show on the road. Links to this video will be in the description, of course. I'm not a monster.
In 2008, the Star Wars prequels were followed up with a fourth movie set between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, mostly explaining why Obi-Wan famously said,
"I was once a
cartoon character
the same as your father."
in the original Star Wars, and introducing the as-yet unknown fact that Anakin had his own Padawan, Ahsoka. This was then followed up by the Clone Wars animated series, originally running until its 6th season in 2014, although Season 6 was technically a post-cancellation release of a few different arcs which were already in production, and then more recently there was the 7th season as well. For some Star Wars...
I'm glad he brought those up, because I am probably going to go into it. Because another big issue with TCW is which parts do you accept as expanded universe, if we have to, and which parts do you accept as not? Because the ending of the show is purely 100% Disney canon. So it's like that. But we'll get into it. We'll get into it.
Fans, this Clone Wars show is a foundational part of building their Star Wars fandom, or even acted as their entry point into Star Wars.
I wanted
but
one of these
it's also
so
the subject of some controversy
helmets.
And has been since it was released, particularly with fans of some of the prior media which made up the Clone Wars multimedia project. Today we're going to talk about some of the reasons why this controversy exists or existed,
that's a cool image.
what its implications are, and where I think some of it gets taken way too far. The Clone Wars multimedia project, or MMP for those unfamiliar.
So what he's arguing here is that it's overblown. So let's hear what he has to say. Then I'm going to explain why it's not overblown, why it has so much controversy surrounding it, and why it damages way more than he's giving it credit. But let's listen to his points.
Refers to a collection of Clone Wars stories told primarily across the Star Wars Republic comics, a set of books which include Shatterpoint, The Cestus Deception, Medstar 1 and 2, Jedi Trial, and Yoda Dark Rendezvous, and then probably most notably the original 2003 animated show by Genndy Tartakovsky. The basic premise with this media, plus some additional young reader novels, video games, and short stories from Star Wars Insider, was to cover the 3 years of the Clone Wars over the 3 years between Episode 2 and 3. In practice, you'll sometimes see the label extended a bit to refer to most things covering the Clone Wars up until the 2008 show and its various tie-in media. So
he's referencing the Republic Commando novels. The Republic Commando novels were not technically part of the Clone Wars multimedia project, but Karen Traviss weaved it in and tied it in so well that I personally count it as part of it. And continuity-wise, it is part of it. Though it's not part of the actual marketing project because it went for years after the marketing project actually concluded. But continuity-wise, I do consider it part of the Clone Wars multimedia project.
So that includes stuff like the Republic Commando books, Dark Lord, the Republic Commando game, and so on, even though they're not strictly part of what the project referred to directly. Well, some of the fan complaints about the 2008 Clone Wars cartoon comes down to opinions on quality. That's not something I'm really going to touch today. This isn't a review.
Yeah, that's subjective. Like you saw in my my little intro when I was reading that unfinished script from the TCW Doesn't Fit in Legends Part 3. That's subjective. But there are objective reasons as to why this show is controversial, and I'm going to get into those. I just want to hear his points.
View of the series, or an attempt to compare the quality of the original show to 2008. Instead, where the controversy I'm talking about today came from is the classic issue of canon and continuity. Essentially, the claim is that the 2008 show should not be considered canon to the expanded universe, now called Legends, because of contradictions to the prior established canon, particularly contradictions between it and the multimedia project. These issues include, but are not limited to, the inclusion of Ahsoka, despite her never being mentioned in media which...
That's a big one. Ahsoka is a huge problem, and it has a lot to do with Anakin. If Ahsoka wasn't Anakin's apprentice, there would be no controversy. Say she was Plo Koon's apprentice, or any other Jedi that did not canonically have an apprentice at the time, she would have been fine. But the fact that she was Anakin's apprentice, that they knighted Anakin like 2 years too early, creates a massive amount of problems. And I've explained this in many of my videos, And we'll explain it a little bit more as he goes, too.
Supposedly existed to cover the entirety of the war before, the existence of the pacifist faction ruling Manda-LORE,
That's a big one, too. Oh, yep, the brain chips. The brain chips. That is not... Okay, we'll get into the brain chips.
the inhibitor chips in the clones versus Order 66 simply being a part of and result of their training and conditioning, and a variety of other things, some smaller, like when characters met, and some larger.
Okay, that's big. With Dooku, that's big. Because it was like... when... I watched the 20th anniversary of Revenge of the Sith in theaters with my wife, like 2 days ago. And, I was thinking about this when Anakin said, my powers have doubled since the last time we met, Count. And I was thinking, like, oh yeah, well, with TCW, that was, like, last frickin' Tuesday. Because they met, like, I can't remember, it was, like, 3-ish times? At least 2 or 3 times. Which kind of cheapens that, but...
or more on the scale of the ones I already mentioned, including one particular example that we'll get into later in the video. The idea that this was separate from the expanded universe was taken even further with the announcement of the sequel trilogy and the reboot of the expanded universe. Since the 2008 show was being included in the new canon, much like the movies, there were renewed arguments that it could, should, or even was excluded from the rebranded Legends continuity.
It could, it should, and it should. I mean, it doesn't fit. So, real quick, somebody shared a meme on my Discord that I thought was perfect. See. Yeah. TCW fans, Clone Wars Multimedia Project fans, you do not fit in here. Okay, we'll make our own place. Legends. Why are you excluding us? Oh no, you do not fit in here. This image sums up exactly what I've been saying all along. Like, TCW basically launched the new canon. The new canon was basically built around TCW and the 6 movies. The new canon was built as a sandbox for Dave Filoni, who, mind you, in the current continuity, he doesn't follow the rules at all. He's already contradicted a couple different novels, and I think like one other TV show that he didn't do. I don't quote me on that. I don't quite know, but I know season 7 like messed up the Ahsoka novel, and it's funny because the Disney canon is basically a sandbox that was created for Filoni to do whatever he wanted and not be limited by a artistic box. Yet he can't even follow the rules of that own continuity, so he's still trampling over everything, and that makes it even more laughable because all of the Disney canon, the not even Disney canon fans, like the EU haters, are going around saying, well, there's no retcons or continuity errors in our canon. Well, there is now, because Filoni, who collectively fucked up our canon, has now fucked up yours too. So I think that's hilarious.
Followed by the serious allegation that the show didn't even like this video or subscribe for more. But aside from people being completely free to say they didn't like the changes it made, I think these claims ignore a lot of how the Legends continuity evolved after the 2008 Clone Wars show started, and overstate the cohesiveness of the pre-existing continuity, even just within the multimedia project.
So, if what I think he's going to say is what he's going to say, the problem with like the late Lucas era continuity is the same issue with the current canon, where people just kind of got lazy. So there was a whole series of Star Wars comics. It was literally just called Star Wars 2014 that messed up a bunch of stuff. The Force Unleashed messed up a few things. It wasn't super big. Like, the biggest thing it messed up was it created an issue where you had Bail Organa was now known by the Emperor as, a rebel sympathizer, yet was able to live for 2 more years until Alderaan was destroyed, and there was no explanation for that. But And then there was some stuff with Dawn of the Jedi as well. And even still, this sort of laziness with the continuity towards the end of the Lucas era, the continuity snarls were still extremely minor, but like the another big one that I could think of was in that same comic series, Star Wars 2014. The Nogri show up before Luke and Leia and Han meet them on Bamil in Heir to the Empire, which is supposed to be the first time that they've ever seen Nogri before. So that's another like big one, but still in the grand scheme of things of what TCW has done comparatively, it's still relatively minor. I'm not gonna excuse it, but it is. I'm just saying comparatively, relatively minor. That's if that's what he's saying. But let's see, because he is right. Towards the end of the Lucas era, there was some laziness with the continuity. But I will get into this more.
As far as the development of the 2008 show goes, concerns about continuity did come up pretty quickly among some fans. It is definitely true that consistency with pre-existing material was not a significant concern for George Lucas, who was...
George Lucas is... How can I put this? George Lucas, he changes his mind. So this is a guy who's done how many different special editions? He clearly, as an artist, I feel like he's one of those artists that hates his own work. He's constantly going back, revising things. His vision when he first made the movies is not his vision when he goes back and edits them. His vision for what the Clone Wars were 30, 40 years ago was not his vision for what the Clone Wars were 20 years ago when he made the prequels. This guy is constantly in flux. He's never once uttered the word canon. I don't even think he knows what it means. George is utterly not concerned with continuity. That's why he hires people to do it for him. That's why Leland Chi existed. That's why Pablo Hidalgo existed. That's why Sue Ross Stoney existed. That's why there was an entire continuity department at Lucasfilm that existed. Coincidentally enough, it's funny that Sue Ross Stoney, when she left, I think she left a little bit before 2012. That's when the continuity stuff started going a little bit, which I think is a bit interesting. Either way, George is not a continuity-minded person. So I'm going to draw a little diagram for you here. So, later. Resize 1920 by 1080. I'll make this red. So, when it comes to people, fandoms, stories, any franchise, so this doesn't matter if it's Star Wars, any multimedia franchise, so it doesn't matter if it's Star Wars, Transformers, Warhammer, Bionicle, any multimedia project, any multimedia franchise where you have several creators and authors working together to make a cohesive story, you're gonna get these types of people and fans and creators in it. So, this is, hold on, let me get my circle here. So the first type of like fan, creator, observer, if you will, of any franchise, you have all inclusive. So people in this circle, they want every single piece of media, no matter how large, from the feature-length films, the TV shows, the novels, the comics, to how small and obscure, to like a blurb for a Micro Machines vehicle or something on the package of like a little $4 Micro Machines toy. They want all of it included, they want to make it fit, no matter how much it doesn't fit. You've also got... I don't know why I used George as a segue into this, but this was a talking point I've wanted to talk about for a while. You've got the next circle. These are continuity-minded folks. I'll just do continuity-minded. So these are people who are more more concerned with the story. They and like the overarching saga. They look back at your franchise as like you're looking back at a history, and you want things to flow and fit. Where the all-inclusives and the continuity-mindeds are different is the continuity-minded folks aren't concerned with, having to remove some things. They would like to, have everything included, but they will remove some stuff. So, like, for example, we'll get into where I fit in. And then the last circle you have, I haven't really thought of a name for them yet. But, like, this last circle, these are people who don't care about, like, the story or anything. They just like seeing their favorite characters doing things. They don't care if it contradicted something their favorite characters did last week or in a previous movie or in a previous book. I don't want to call them casuals because... I mean, there's a lot of derogatoriness in that. Not that being a casual fan of anything is bad. And don't get me wrong, casual fans do fit in the circle. I feel like they make up 90% of the circle, really. We'll just put casual for lack of a better term. But 90% of like casual fans will fit in this circle. They don't care about, the story, the continuity. They don't care what their favorite characters were doing in the previous movie or last week. They just like seeing their favorite characters go and do what they do. They don't really care about anything. They just like the pew-pews. They don't care about the story or the intricacy. They just want the pew-pews. And there's nothing inherently wrong with being a casual fan. Like, for example, I'm a casual fan of many things. I'm a casual fan of Warhammer 40,000. I'm a casual fan of like Halo, where I've only really read a couple books and played like a game or two. I'm a very casual fan of Dune because I've only seen the Denis Villeneuve movies. I haven't read the books or anything. But there's nothing wrong with being a casual fan. What happens when it comes to being wrong with a casual fan is when you go into a franchise casual and then not liking something about it and you demand that it changes. It's like, no. You fundamentally don't understand how things work. I'm not saying George Lucas is in this. I know I used George Lucas as a segue to this. That was not a great choice on my part. I just thought in my mind, my monkey brain, there was neuron activation, and it coalesced. This was something I've wanted to talk about. But yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with being a casual fan. George is kind of... Let's see. I'd put George like here. He is continuity minded. But there's even, like, if you look at just the movies too, there's even things that don't fit in the movies. And eventually they were explained away by either subsequent movies or the expanded universe. Like, for example, in Empire Strikes Back, when Obi-Wan says, oh, well, Yoda is the Jedi who trained me. When we, in fact, know that it was actually Qui-Gon Jinn who trained him. But then Episode 2 kind of fixed that. It was like, oh, look, Yoda's training all the younglings. So it's like, you could tell that, like, he has, like, an overarching vision. It's just not as expansive. And he's even said that in Alan Dean Foster's Splinter of the Mind's Eye. He wrote a blurb He basically said that like Star Wars had become bigger than him, and that's why he let all these writers and everything. I'm sure this will keep. I'm sure this will keep going when Corey inevitably brings it up again in his videos. But where I sit about here. I'm continuity minded, but I like to include as much as I can. But I'm not stupid. I know that there are some things that can't fit. Like, for example, the entire TCW series does not fit in the expanded universe. I'm fine with it fitting in the Disney canon. That's fine. And, you know, I've done 2-3 whole freaking videos about why it doesn't fit in the expanded universe. I know what I'm talking about. I've done my research. So, I'm firmly of the belief that, you know, it doesn't fit in the expanded universe. And there are some things that come with, like, the Fate of the Jedi series, where I kind of have to do a little bit of mental gymnastics to try to make it fit. Like, for example, with the Fate of the Jedi series, it helps a lot that Ahsoka isn't mentioned at all in those books. So what I ended up doing was imagining that the whole Mortis arc was a vision that Obi-Wan and Anakin were having, and that they reported to Yoda, and then that's what the story that Yoda told Luke. Because it was clear, Yoda clearly was like, oh, that's the Force trying to tell them something. So it's like, you can't take anything out, but if I could leave the rest of the show out and just take the Mortis arc, I will do that. Like, I'm not going to go, like, full-on mental gymnastics, but I will do a tiny bit. But the people in this circle, the all-inclusive, they will do a whole bunch of mental gymnastics to make anything fit, even if it just objectively doesn't fit. And this isn't always a bad thing, because it has resulted sometimes in really great retcons. So, for example, no doubt Corey will talk about this when we continue on the video. Boba Fett is the example everybody brings up when they talk about the expanded universe and retcons. Boba Fett had 3 different backstories. His first backstory was that he was a stormtrooper that killed his commanding officer and deserted. Another backstory that he was a journeyman protector on Concord Dawn. His real name was Jaster Muriel. And, I can't remember all the details with that because it gets muddled. You'll see in a second. And then, obviously, George Lucas's version, he was a clone of a bounty hunter named Jango Fett. What the expanded universe did was really clever, where I guess it doesn't really count as mental gymnastics, so it doesn't really count per se, but there was a couple different comics. So there was Jango Fett Open Seasons and Boba Fett Blood Ties, and then there's a little bit of more information in the Legacy of the Force novels concerning Boba Fett, where they took his backstory, they took all 3 of these backstories and they combined them to make them all true, which is why I love the expanded universe so much and appreciate it. So they made it so, yeah, Boba Fett is a clone of Jango Fett, and then they said, like, oh, well, after the Clone Wars and all that happened, he went off to Concord Dawn and became a journeyman protector, like his, Jaster Muriel used to be. Oh, well, I should go back and explain Jaster Muriel first. So in Jango Fett Open Seasons, they explained that Jaster Muriel was actually Jango Fett's adopted father, because his parents were killed by the Death Watch, and then he got adopted by Jaster Muriel. Jaster Muriel ends up getting killed by the Death Watch, and then Jango Fett leads the true Mandalorians against the Death Watch. There's a huge battle of Galadran where the true Mandalorians get wiped out. Jango goes back and ends up killing the Death Watch leader and a majority of the Death Watch people on their ship. So then when Boba comes along, after the Clone Wars and all that stuff happens, Boba goes off to Concord Dawn, kind of get in touch with his roots. He takes up the pseudonym Jaster Muriel, gets married to a gal named Cintas Vel. They have a kid together. In the Journeyman Protectors, at this point, the Journeyman Protectors have been taken over by, I think it was like Imperial Like there was an Imperial governor there. So it was they're kind of cool. They were like imperialized Mandalorian police. It's interesting, to say the least. I should do a video about Mandalorian journeyman protectors on my Manda-LORE channel. Maybe I will. Regardless, so his commanding officer within the journeyman protectors actually ends up doing no things, because his YouTube, I can't say the R word. He does no things with his wife. So Boba Fett kind of kills him, and then he ends up going on the run because he killed his commanding officer, who also happens to be the governor of Concordon's son. And then he ends up leaving Sintes with their child. That's a whole mess that gets covered in Legacy of the Force. But yeah, so that's kind of how... I mean, I guess it is when you explain it that way. It is a little bit mental gymnastics. When you're actually reading the stories, it's not. It sounds like mental gymnastics from me, just a fan telling you about these stories. Go read them for yourself. I mean, I'm not going to condone piracy, but there are places where you can get these comics. And of course, the Legends Epic collections have these comics in them. So I encourage you to go read these if you're interested. But that's the point I'm trying to make. So yeah, all-inclusive fans aren't bad, because they result in retcons actually making sense and doing good. And then so George is here, I'm here. I think Corey and I are in the same hemicircle sort of overlapping area. I think he's a little bit over here though. I think he's a little bit more towards the all-inclusive side. Just because, he likes TCW and he wants to include it, or feels that it should be included. And that's fine. I'm not going to criticize why he feels he should be included. I'm here to dispute the point that he's making, that these changes aren't controversial and that we should just accept it because that's what the status quo is. But yeah, this gives you a glimpse into like the three types of people in franchises, and this isn't just, this is any franchise. This could be Star Wars, could be any multimedia project franchise, Transformers, Warhammer, Bionicle, stuff like that. And it also transcends sub-fandoms within. So it doesn't matter if you're a sequel trilogy fan, a prequel trilogy fan, an OT fan, expanded universe fan, Disney canon fan. These apply to all. These transcend everything. And this is just what I've found for being alive for 30 years and being in this fandom for 25 of those 30 years. So, let's get back to the video before I go way off topic here.
Was very much involved in the initial production of the show, including being the originator of the idea that Anakin had a Padawan, even if a lot of the actual work into creating Ahsoka and a lot of the show running was done more directly by Dave Filoni. And
this is true. So, yeah, George did create Ahsoka. Dave Filoni kind of took her, though, and went way further. Now, where I disagree is I don't think that was a good idea. And people will justify by, oh, well, it was George's idea. It's still a bad idea to give Anakin an apprentice. Watch episode 2 and episode 3, and, why would you give this psychopath a 13-year-old kid to mold into a Jedi when Anakin is not the embodiment of the perfect Jedi? Which we will get into Anakin because, as I've said before, the Anakin in TCW and the Anakin in the movies are two completely different Anakins. And this is solely because, TCW is basically an apology for the prequels. And bear with me, because I know it's a bold claim. if you look at all of the major issues with the Star Wars prequels that people had, all the major criticisms, TCW does the opposite. So let's look at some of the criticisms with Anakin. So people said he was too whiny. Does TCW Anakin whine? Not once. He was too like emotionally unstable. Anakin in TCW is a mature adult. He's this war hero. He's this like, he's like this poster child for Jedi-ness. Whereas the Anakin we see in the prequels is not that at all. And we're supposed to believe that Anakin goes from how he behaved in Episode 2, which was absolutely atrocious, to TCW in no time. That's unbelievable to me. That disrupts my suspension of disbelief that is necessary when having a fictional universe and wanting the people in it, the people observing it, to take it seriously, wanting the universe itself to take itself seriously. You need to have that suspension of disbelief, and that just severs it. Because Anakin in Episode 3 and Episode 2 are completely different from Anakin in all of TCW. Just straight out. And because they had to mature him up, they made him a knight, which was stupid. In the original continuity, which I think did it better, Anakin doesn't become a knight until like almost the end of the war. And the Jedi Council didn't even want to knight him. Obi-Wan put that forth, thinking that the Council wouldn't accept, but they were so desperate for more Jedi generals after General Grievous basically slaughtered most of them, and just overall attrition from the war, that they had to do anything they could. Whereas they give Anakin, in this continuity, knighthood immediately after Geonosis, which is stupid, frankly. Because given his behavior in Geonosis, why would you make this kid a Jedi Knight after he disobeyed every mandate the Council gave him? Let Dooku, through his actions, he didn't try to let Dooku get away, to be fair to Anakin, but through his actions, Dooku got away, sparking an intergalactic war, which that was going to happen anyway, if you have the proper context. But regardless, I'm saying from the context of the Jedi Council. And then you have, his stupid behavior. You're gonna A, give this kid a knighthood. B, you're gonna give him a general's commission where he now leads troops into battle after, his actions at the Battle of Geonosis were not at all command-worthy. And then you're also going to give him the responsibility for a 13-year-old Padawan. That makes no sense. It makes no sense whatsoever, and I'm tired of people pretending it does. I think it's stupid. I think Ahsoka would have been better off as somebody else's Padawan that palled around with Anakin, so you could still have that relationship. But I think Anakin should have been a Padawan himself for a majority of the show, I think. Because that would have given him time to actually grow into the Anakin you wanted him to be in the show. Whereas there's no character development. It's just, hey, here's the idealized version of Anakin that everybody wanted in the prequels. That's it. So that's my problem with Anakin. I'm sure it'll be brought up again.
Especially in the eyes of the fans, Filoni became the main name and face attached to the show. Filoni addressed a question in 2008 about continuity with the expanded universe, saying this.
But much like the actual theatrical features, we can't let that get in the way of telling the story George wants to, or telling a story that just kind of makes sense for the period of time we're involved with. I take a lot of that information that I'm aware of and I bring it in front of George when we're first pitching out an idea, or when he has an idea, and I say, well, this was on Wikipedia and this is in this dictionary, so we better look at this. And, he considers it or not. Sometimes he hasn't seen that material at all and he's kind of surprised. And sometimes it's just not something that interests him because, it wasn't really something that he had invented and he wants to go a different direction.
So ultimately, much like he did with the prequels, George was going to do what George wanted to do, while others around him, like
And that's kind of what I was saying earlier. George is going to do what he wants to do. He's not really concerned with the things that we're concerned about, that you and I watching this video are concerned about. He's not concerned about continuity. He's not concerned about the overarching, of his story. He's only concerned about the stories he wants to tell, the messages he wants to convey, and how he wants to do them. And as a creator, that's his right. Do I think all of his ideas are great? No. Do I think that he should be demonized for these ideas? No, absolutely not. I don't agree with his ideas. I think the more he went down his career, the worse his ideas got. That's my subjective opinion. That's not fact. That's my subjective opinion. And that doesn't mean that we can't respect him and listen to him. But I also think Star Wars is bigger than George Lucas. I think Star Wars has gotten away from... And obviously, he's not even involved with it anymore anyways. And it's still going. So that's just proof, really, that Star Wars is bigger than George Lucas. And that there are tons of other individuals that have great ideas and want to contribute to the story. And I think it was awesome that, for a good 37 years, everybody came together and like, hey, let's try to make this cohesive. And, let's try to make this all like one big history. And I think that was great. And I think not a lot of people are concerned with that anymore. And that makes me sad. I feel like they're going back to the fandom chart thing I made. I feel like there's more of these people that just want their pew-pews than there are of these people. And that makes me sad. That's just my observation. Don't crucify me for it.
Dave had a bit more experience with the expanded universe and tried to get in.
That's a fucking lie. That's a straight up fucking lie, you disingenuous person. Dave Filoni has never read any of this. He was literally, in the last clip he was just showing, just talking about Wikipedia. This guy has never read anything. He doesn't care. From what we've seen of the show, I could deduce this. Maybe Dave has played Knights of the Old Republic. At least a couple levels. At least gotten to Onderon. Maybe he's read or listened to an audiobook, probably abridged, of Heir to the Empire. From everything I've seen in the show, from what he's said in interviews, that's what I feel is probably his extent of knowledge of the expanded universe. I think the rest he gets from Wikipedia. As we all know, Wikipedia is fucking garbage. So...
in a few things, or at least gave George in the show the option of following it and pulling from it or not. But the overriding concern, as it so often is, was telling the story they wanted to tell, and this certainly applies to Filoni and the other writers as well. I don't want to give the impression that this was just George fighting back against a room full of people who were trying to maintain the sanctity of continuity or something. You can decide for yourself how serious or ridiculous you think that phrase is, but they all did follow George's lead on that. The pre-existing lore from the expanded universe...
I'm glad they didn't do the Yuuzhan Vong, because they would have fucked it up.
...from the MMP wasn't something they were or felt beholden to. It was instead an area they could pull from if they felt like it. So characters like Ventress, who played a huge role in prior media, could be brought in, but a lot could and would be changed about both their backgrounds and the events in which they participated in the war. Originally...
Oh, okay. I was about to go with Ventress. I was about to say my piece, but
Ventress was supposed to have been from Red Attack, but in the Clone Wars she gets established as having been taken from the Night Sisters. The fact that the show did make these kinds of changes to the lore even became controversial among some of the Star Wars authors.
We'll get to Karen in a second, but okay, he didn't touch up on Asajj Ventress as much as I wanted him to. So, the controversy with Ventress. So, and it's funny how he's like, oh, it's so overblown, yet doesn't actually go into Ventress. It's just like, oh, they just changed her backstory a little bit. But now I'm going to tell you the truth of all of what happened to Ventress. So, Ventress used to be a Rat Attack guy. She was from Rat Attack. They created a whole species for her. And you can even be a Rat Attack guy in SWTOR, from what I understand. So she was a child of 2 Rat Attack guy warlords, because the thing with Rat Attack is there's no central government. It's just basically a giant gladiator arena where all these different warlords are vying for control. So her parents are killed. This Jedi named Kai Narek crash lands. He goes and actually finds that Ventress is force sensitive, so he takes her under his wing. And then they fight to unite Rat Attack. And I think his original goal, it's never stated, but I think Narek's goal was eventually to get Rat Attack admitted to the Republic and start helping to civilize the world. But he ends up getting killed by a rival warlord, and then that tips Ventress over to the dark side. And she ends up raging her own conquest and becomes queen of Rat Attack herself. And then a few years later, Dooku comes, recruits her for the CIS. That we see in the opening of one of the episodes for the Clone Wars micro-series. With that, they changed her to be a Dathomiri, which, now looking at this from a continuity perspective, we have this whole new race, Rat Attack, which was created specifically for Asajj Ventress. Whereas now this race exists, but the character that the race was created for is no longer Rat Attack. Do you see how kind of fucked that is? Is that overblown to you? I don't think that's overblown. I think that's kind of fucked. And then you create this new species, because Dathomiri was never a species, so... Alright, now I gotta get into the Witches of Dathomir. This is why it was not overblown, Corey. It was not fucking overblown. Because now I'm just gonna keep going into more tangents of more shit this show fucked up. So, stop being disingenuous. Here we go. Dathomiri. So the Dathomiri, 600 years before the Battle of Yavin, a ship crash landed, and then from it, these force-sensitive women kind of like created like a matriarchy, and they became the Witches of Dathomir, and they took males as slaves. But Dathomir is not a species. Most of them were human. I think there were some other Dathomir witches of different species. It really depended who crash landed on the planet, and whether they were female or not. If you were male, just straight up, you were taken as a slave. And you were doing hard labor and fighting their wars for them, because the Dathomiri clans aren't united. Whereas TCW only shows the Night Sisters, which they kind of screw up too, because they don't use the Force in the way like the Sith do. They call it like it's dark magic, because they don't have like an understanding of the Force in the way like the Jedi do. It's more, they use in more like an animistic sense of the Force. They view it as like a nature thing rather than like a mystical energy field you can tap into. They don't really know the science of it. But regardless, they don't show any of the other Dathomiri witch clans. I mean, we can infer that they were there, but they make the whole planet go from like... So what Dathomir used to look like was just like your typical enchanted forest. It's like, imagine Endor from the Ewoks movies. It's like your typical fantasy forest. And then they made it into Brothers Grimmified it to make like the whole planet look like this dark evil Dagobah cave swamp, and it's just not. It's not. Like I said, it's not overblown. Let's continue. He's about to talk about Karen Traviss and how she quit, and I'm sure he'll insult her. Let's see.
Particularly for Karen Traviss, author of the Republic Commando books, who was upset about some of what was done with the clones and the Mandalorians in particular, and then who left Star Wars writing as a result of these changes. Henry Gilroy, who...
They wanted to make her... So this is from Karen Traviss's blogs, which They're still up. You can still read them. They wanted to make her go back and rewrite all the Republic Commando novels to fit within their new Clone Wars continuity. And she said, no, get stuffed. And she left. That to me is controversial. But no, it's overblown, isn't it, Corey? That's what you're claiming here. That's what you're falsely claiming here. That it's so overblown. Let's listen to what this clown has to say.
Who wrote for the 2008 movie and show, said, quote, "It's unfortunate that she is moving on because of her opinion that canon is being changed. I guess the big problem is the assumption that her work is canon in the first place. After working with George on the Clone Wars series, I know there are elements of her work that are not in line with his vision of Star Wars, and in my mind, only George Lucas's Star Wars is canon. Everything else is expanded universe. In my opinion, George's work on Star Wars, whether he created it before or after the other writers, trumps all because he created Star Wars in the first place. So technically you may be saying the creators didn't consider the show part of the expanded universe either. But it's not quite in the...
I mean, I think that's a pretty good argument for my take. That it doesn't fit.
same way that the argument it should be excluded from Legends holds. Instead, it's more akin to the way that the movies aren't considered part of the expanded universe in and of themselves, but they still very much make up the canon that the expanded universe is based on. So they are included in the canon of the expanded universe, even if as individual pieces of media, they are not labeled expanded universe.
The difference with the movies and the show is that without the 6 films, the expanded universe wouldn't exist. Without TCW, the expanded universe had existed and thrived in a golden age before this show came and fucked it up. That's the difference, Corey. That's the difference.
And the difference between the handling of this for the prequels and for the cartoon is not a difference in type, it's simply a difference in degree. This kind of thing is why in 2000 the Holocron Continuity Database was created by Leland Shee, labeling multiple different tiers of canon hierarchy, placing George's work at the top in G canon,
I've been over this
followed
in many
by
of my
C
videos.
or continuity canon, which was most of the recent material, particularly since Heir to the Empire, followed by S or secondary canon, which tended to include things from the old Marvel comics, for example, that had a lot of differences from what was going on at the time. Then there was D or Detours canon from Star Wars Detours, and finally things like the Infinity stories under an entirely non-canon label. When the 2008 Clone Wars was...
I don't know why he's including D canon when Star Wars Detours never came out. I think we should have D canon for Disney canon. That's what I think. I think everything else should trump that. But that's my subjective opinion.
created and other shows like Star Wars Underworld were being planned by George, they were placed between the C and G canon levels as T or television canon. Notably, this database doesn't categorize things by individual work, it primarily lists things by piece of lore. I think one particularly unhelpful thing that people do, which has gotten possibly even more common recently, is that they'll see one contradiction between a newer work and an older work, and they'll jump straight to getting angry that the whole thing is...
But it's not just one contradiction, is it, Corey? Is it? I think you're being a little disingenuous here. It's not just one contradiction, it's an entire fuck ton of contradictions. Maybe in the new canon there's 1 or 2 contradictions here that people get mad about. And every TCW episode that I've watched, there's at least 5 things that contradicts the expanded universe. The canon that was canon at the time. God knows what it is for the Disney canon. I don't watch it, so I don't know.
is no longer canon or no longer counts. It's again very difficult to find any two works which are entirely 100% in sync with each other, so you kind of always have to go in with an understanding that beyond the scope of the story you're reading at the moment, sometimes things don't all work out together. When the prequels came out, a lot of prior assumptions about what the period looked like...
I covered a little bit of this earlier, so just think back to my Boba Fett comment when he made this.
went out the window, and a lot of competing visions from both books and comics turned out to be wrong, some of which played significant roles in foundational parts of the expanded universe, like the Thrawn trilogy. I've done a video on this in the past, which I'll link to, so we won't go into too many details here, but the fact that the prequels did so heavily contradict parts of the Thrawn trilogy doesn't mean that the Thrawn trilogy shouldn't have been considered canon to the expanded universe anymore, or...
I'm going to say my take really quick before I let him finish his take. So, they told the expanded universe authors right off, they're like, hey, don't really talk about the Clone Wars. We're George is probably going to go cover those in future movies. They knew this. Still, going back to our Boba Fett conversation, the expanded universe actually kind of took this and retconned it and made something of it. So, for example, the clones in the original expanded universe, it was thought that, like, we literally only have like 2 paragraphs on what the Clone Wars probably were, what people thought they were. Whereas the big thing was they thought the clones were evil, and that it was on this planet and there was these clones fighting each other. It was in the Star Wars Republic, like the later issues, I think in like the 70s or 80s, like issue numbers. It was in the early 2000s that these comics were made. But it was the comic book arc was called The Siege of Sayalakumi, where what do you call it? The on Sayalakumi, the CIS were creating an army of Nikto clones after this character named Bach, who appears earlier in the series, but that's a whole different story. So they created this shadow clone army, and the reason why the Republic were besieging it was because Quinlan and Thom had found out that Sora Bulg was, building this shadow clone army, so they wanted to go and stop it before they could spread it into the galaxy, and it would just be clones fighting clones all over the galaxy. And then also in a short story called Heroes of Carteo, Timothy Zahn kind of does the same thing, where that whole story is about how the Republic and how Palpatine ultimately acquires the Spa'artai cloning cylinders that Thrawn uses. And in it, he's kind of retconning a little bit what he said about the Clone Wars in, what was it? It's not Heir to the Empire, the second one, Dark Force Rising.
Or that, conversely, the prequel should have been jettisoned when the reboot happened either. Much like we'll see with the 2008 cartoon, as the expanded universe went on beyond the prequel's publishing, the prequels continued to get more and more built into the stories that were coming out in later novels, and while some things did get satisfactorily retconned, other things just kind of stick out as not being compatible, and it's just kind of a what are you going to do situation.
A lot of things with TCW were not compatible. Like, with the whole Mandalorians thing, they had to create this whole conflict and reasoning why the Republic would have bombarded the Mandalorians. It was a whole thing called the Mandalorian Excision. You can read about it in the Bounty Hunter's Code. Regardless, it was even the retcons that they tried to use to try to make TCW make sense within the context of the expanded universe don't work, because then those retcons need mental gymnastics to work. Like the whole Mandalorian Excision, takes place 700 something years before the Battle of Yavin. By that point, the Republic Navy didn't exist. There were some judicial forces, yeah, but they didn't have anything with a firepower more than a heavy cruiser, because under the Anaxis War College system, not the Anaxis War College system, that comes later, the Rusan Reformations, any ship over 600 meters in length, the bigger the ships you make, the more, the more limited they become. So they become more limited in firepower, shielding, armor, armament, even hyperdrive capabilities. So that's the reason why during Phantom Menace era, you don't see any huge Star Destroyers. You see the big Lucrehulk battleships, but those are converted cargo carriers. They basically took, for a real-world equivalent, they basically took oil tankers and put guns on them. That's how they got around that, but regardless, the Republic didn't have a standing navy at the time. The judicial forces didn't have the ships that would be required to bombard a planet, because that was pretty much outlawed by the Rusan Reformations. So it was just more mental gymnastics to support more mental gymnastics to support retcons to figure out how the fuck this shit's supposed to fit in, which didn't work. That's where the controversy is coming, and I don't think Corey understands this. And I know he's smart. I know he reads. I know he does. Like, he seems like a good guy. I don't think he's being disingenuous for the sake of being disingenuous. But, like, this is fundamentally wrong. Everything he's saying. I mean, I've agreed with a few points in here, but they're mostly objective fact that anybody can go read. But the overall premise of the video, that it was overblown, is wrong. Let's keep going.
But while George may not have been under any obligation to care about what expanded universe authors or creators did, even if he did sometimes decide to pull elements like the name Coruscant and then Aayla Secura in, but the expanded universe authors and creators were pretty beholden to what George decided.
George literally told John Ostrander to not kill Quinlan Vos at the end of Star Wars Republic because he liked the character. We know George read some of the comics. George is a visual guy. He's worked in filmmaking long before any of us were born. George is a visual guy. We know George read some of the comics. And I hate it when people say he wasn't involved with the expanded universe, because that's incorrect. We have documentation. I literally did on this channel the whole why the expanded universe debunked thing, where it was actually just me explaining why all of the the EU hater stuff is bullshit. I've explained. I've showed proof that George was involved in the expanded universe. Was he involved in every single thing? No. He was limitedly involved. But to say that he wasn't involved at all and that he sometimes pick and chose things is disingenuous.
And this applied to the Clone Wars 2008 show as well as to the movies. So this is where you really run into issues with saying you can just lift the 2008 Clone Wars out and then nothing else would change in the expanded universe.
But you can. You lift the 2008 series out. You ignore the tie-in comics and novels, which is pretty easy. Although there is some cool stuff with like more backstory for Pelion, more backstory for Jyn Altis, and Callista Ming in some of those novels, because Karen Travis wrote them and she's great. I think she's great because I'm a Mandalorian, but that's my bias. Obviously, at least I'm not lying about my bias like Corey is here. You can see my bias literally on my fucking face. But no, I lost my train of thought. Anyways.
Or where, in my opinion, you're being unreasonable if you claim that a quote-unquote true expanded universe fan would never include the 2008 Clone Wars cartoon in the Legends continuity.
The true fan argument is bullshit, and I've always said that from the beginning. I know plenty of expanded universe fans that are TCW inclusionists, and that's fine by them. I vehemently disagree with them, and they're free to believe whatever they want. I don't care. I don't think they're any less of a fan. I just think they don't care about the same things I care about when it comes to story, continuity, when it comes to overall. I see what he's saying, because it is hard to believe that somebody could be a fan of the entire expanded universe and, want to include something so destructive in it. Then again, I know people that love TCW but are smart enough to realize that it doesn't fit, and, they'll headcanon in some things, maybe. That's the beauty of headcanon. But I think lifting it out completely is not impossible. As I've said, it takes less retcons to retcon TCW out than it does to keep it in. And I've illustrated this in several of my other videos. I've said this in several streams. I literally said it earlier when I was talking about Fate of the Jedi. It's easier, it takes less retcons to remove it than it does to keep it in.
As I've seen on at least a few occasions since we announced that the Fall of the Republic mod I work on for Empire at War would include content from the cartoon.
I think deleted user is
something we
correct.
have heard repeatedly. When the 2008 show came out, we were still 6 years from the reset. So Leland Chee and others at Lucasfilm got to work trying to make the retcons they could to make things fit together
And I just
as much as
explained how
possible.
they all sucked.
Generally, the strategy here was saying the multimedia project stuff was in a much more compressed time frame at the start of the war, rather than covering the whole war. And this works.
So yeah, if you read The Essential Reader's Companion by Pablo Hidalgo, they basically took all of like the first 2.5 years of the entire Clone Wars, and they squished it into a period of 4 weeks. 4 weeks. Sorry, I didn't know where my camera was. 4 weeks. 2.5 years and 4 weeks. And this is, mind you, this is a lot of content. That's how they solved the whole, Anakin being knighted immediately after Geonosis. Oh, he wasn't knighted immediately after Geonosis. He still went through all that bullshit in the Clone Wars multimedia project. It was just in a small time frame. The Battle of Jabim took, 38 days? I don't have my comics with me right now. I'd have to get up, and I don't want to. No, I think it was 41 days or something. And even while you're reading the comic, it says there's the day counter. It's day 36. And Razor Coast or whatever. There are battles. Oh, the Battle of Atrakan took a year. The Battle of Drongar took a year. The Battle of Megiddo was the longest battle of the Clone Wars. That was 1.5 years to 2 years. So you're gonna compress all this into a month? That makes no sense. I think that's pretty fucking controversial, Corey. You don't? You think that's overblown? I think you're fucking overblown. I think this video is fucking overblown. Well, who are you doing damage control for? Your own opinions? I don't understand.
It's better for some stuff than for others. We'll talk about the 2003 show in a bit, but the vast majority of that is actually set in the first 4 months of the war, so that doesn't become a huge problem. The final 4 chapters of that show, chapters 22 through 25, are set in the kind of final moments of the war, but we'll get back to that in a little bit. For the books, this gets a bit trickier. But even if you discount all of that, which you are again perfectly free to do, there were still years of Star Wars content released within the Legends continuity and which directly reference events, characters, technology, location.
Yeah, I just said this. So with the tie-in stuff, remove it with the show. I don't care. Like I said though, I will admit, you do lose a little value. You lose some stuff with Pelion, you lose some stuff with Jyn Altis and Callista Ming. But overall, I'm willing to lose that for. And in the Republic Commando novels, Pelion appears in those too. So it's not like his Clone Wars backstory is completely gone. He also shows up a couple times in the Republic comics as well.
And whatever else from the show. This includes reference books making heavy use of both elements.
Fun fact. If you look at can you see my mouse? Yes, you can. So this little holo chart that they're making here, this is an Empire at War map. This is my Empire at War map I made for the Clone Wars 4.0 mod. This is Bombus Cori 4, which was a planet that's in the micro series. Obi-Wan and Anakin were assaulting. It's the one where the green scaly guy is like, how many Jedi? What, 100? 1,000? 50? Come on! It was that planet. So that's supposed to be Aura Desane's fortress. So it's funny. This is my one and only contribution to the expanded universe, I guess. And just I guess as a fuck you to me, they put her here. But I don't know. I just wanted to, every time I see this image, I like to point it out because it gives me warm fuzzies knowing that even though it was minuscule, I made some sort of contribution to the expanded universe before they killed it.
Of the 2008 show and the 2003 show or other MMP elements, like the Essential Guides, especially the Essential Guide to Warfare and the official Star Wars Fact File, or elements from the Clone Wars showing up in book plots. Probably most notable here comes with the tie-ins between Abeloth, the villain in the Fate
I
of
already
the Jedi
explained
series,
this when I talked
with
about
the
Fate of the
Mortis
Jedi.
trio from the Clone Wars cartoon. Mortis, the Mortis trio, and the dagger get tied in fairly heavily there. So if you're saying the Clone Wars cartoon isn't...
Yep, so I already, as I already explained, if you view it, you can do a little bit of fuckiness. It doesn't require tons of mental gymnastics, but you do a little bit. Mortis was a vision that Obi-Wan and Anakin were having, that they reported to Yoda, and that Yoda had told Luke on Dagobah. Fixed. Fate of the Jedi doesn't mention Ahsoka at all, and it really goes no more into the Mortis arc than it does really talking about the vision.
Isn't part of Legends, you then have to decide if that also includes everything which references the Clone Wars as well, or if you're allowing that to...
As I said, just cut it. I think most of the tie-in novels are like meh, so I don't care. This particular one that this image is from, so because this gal here, that's Callista Ming. I think she has a different last name at this point, but this is from, it's either Gambit, Clone Wars Gambit Stealth or Siege. One of the ones that Karen Travis wrote. But this is the one I was talking about earlier with Pelion and the Altesian sect of Jedi. I mean, I guess you could do some mental gymnastics to try to make that fit in. But like I said, she and Pelion both appear in the Republic Commando novels, and Pelion appears in the Republic comics as well. So it's like you lose a little bit of extra info, but you're not like losing a crucial amount. Excuse me. You're not losing a crucial amount of info really on these characters or what they're doing. So you can cut it out or headcanon it. I don't care. I just cut it out.
Remain part of Legends. So is there Legends 1, which is everything up to 2008, Legends 2, which has everything up to 2008 plus the stuff from 2008 to 2014, and what's the bar for contradictions to cut other things out as well? And all of this, I think, gets to the fundamental...
Okay, yeah, so, I'm sorry, I keep stopping. He kind of made a point that I somewhat agree with. So, it's like, at what point do things stop? But my concern is in the opposite direction of him. So, for example, he's saying, like, oh, well, if you're gonna try to retcon TCW out of the expanded universe, at what point are you gonna do that? Oh, just do it completely. Fuck that, just do it completely. But, for me, it's the opposite. So, if you're trying to include TCW in the expanded universe, at what point do you include it to? Do you only include the first 5 seasons? Because that's technically the only thing we got before it was canceled. Do we include season 6 that was released on Netflix? Even though that was under a different company. And I think that was in a weird quasi area of nobody knew what was going to happen with the continuity at the time. I believe it was post 2014, but it could have... the season could have been made pre 2014. So do you count it as expanded universe, or do you count it as do you count it as the last of the expanded universe, or you count it the first of the Disney canon? What do? You tell me. Your answer is just as correct as mine, because there's no fucking answer. Do you include season 7, even though that has clear tie-ins to Rebels and Bad Batch and all that shit? I say no. But then if you don't, here's the problem. If you don't include season 7 of TCW in the expanded universe, then you have an incomplete picture of what the Clone Wars were, because you have this show that stops after only 4, 5, 6 seasons, depending on... Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see what I'm saying? That there's this is so fucked to the point where it's easier just to not. Just... TCW is Disney canon. That's its home. Disney canon essentially was built for TCW. That's TCW's home. TCW stays there. Reinstate everything that TCW retconned back into the expanded universe. Do a couple mini retcons for like Fate of the Jedi. You're good. And then the tie-in stuff, just fucking throw it. Just fucking throw it. Put it in S canon. We got the canon tiers. Put it in S canon. What fits fits. What doesn't. I don't care. It still is a more cohesive story than anything it with TCW in it.
Mental reason claiming it can't possibly be part of Legends is just kind of pointless. There almost feels like there's this idea that there was some pre-existing consistent continuity that the Clone Wars uniquely came along and ruined.
There was.
Even just in the period.
There was.
I'm not suggesting the show was consistent with everything before it, far from it, but it's also far from the first thing that caused significant issues with the material that came before.
Alright, so this is what I've been waiting for. He is now going to attempt to justify TCW fucking with the continuity by rattling off a couple tiny inconsistencies with the Clone Wars multimedia project, either with itself and or the rest of the expanded universe. I already know off the top of my head what he's going to talk about. He's probably going to talk about Jedi Trial. He's going to talk about the issues with Labyrinth of Evil and the last couple chapters of Clone Wars. And I think that's all I could talk about. All I could think of at the top of my head. Let's see what he comes up with.
Before it. I don't even think it gets to the point of being the biggest set of contradictions. The Marvel comics, for example, are fundamentally incompatible with the timeline they present for the galaxy with the prequels and then the 90s expanded universe books, as are many of the ideas about the Clone Wars or the early Empire from before the prequels, which I talked about in that prior video. But several elements did get worked into future projects as well. Fenshisa's whole backstory being a mess didn't stop him from making his way into later references. You can still take the Marvel comics as being technically part of Legends, while understanding that there are a lot of...
Well, they are, because Lumaya appears in Legacy of the Force and is a crucial part of that. So, yes. That's why they exist in S-Canon, Corey. So... elements of the comics that do fit are brought in. Like, example, Lumaya was brought in. While elements that don't fit were just kind of left there. Like, the Wes Jansen dying at the Battle of Hoth, obviously that couldn't fit, but, Lumaya being a thing, that doesn't contradict anything. So they kept it in.
Of weird continuity bits to that. There's a reason most of my regular lore videos have at least one caveat saying that one source says one thing about a topic while another says something else. This is just part of understanding Star Wars lore. Where the Clone Wars does cause some unique problems is where it's directly covering a time period that other material was already covering on a larger scale.
Yeah, like a year
The prequels,
before.
for example, were contradicting things that tended to just be allusions, flashbacks, or similar references. Though that didn't make them any less attempts at factual claims about galactic history. You still ended up in a situation where, for example, the ages of Corran Horn's family are next to impossible to reconcile. But really, a lot of the
Yeah, okay, so he's referencing Jedi Trial there, and that was one of the big things when I was reading that. I'm like, so wait, how the fuck old is Nija Halcyon? Because Nija Halcyon's supposed to be Corran Horn's grandfather, but back then it was thought that the Clone Wars took place like years and years ago. It wasn't thought that the Clone Wars were like, only 20 years ago, which I guess is still a long time, but in the grand galactic scheme of things, no, it's pretty recent. So yeah, that was one of the issues that I wish they had. I wish they had Stackpole actually write Jedi Trial instead of the two guys that they had write it, but yeah,
motivation.
I still don't think it's like major. I don't think it's like universe breaking. You don't need retcons upon retcons upon retcons to explain it.
Seems to come from this idea not just that 2008 contradicts things, it's that it needlessly runs afoul of the multimedia project, which,
yes, it does.
In the context of this complaint, tends to get represented as this perfect example of watertight continuity between different bits of media.
Not watertight, but certainly better than TCW.
media. It's certainly true that this kind of cross-medium project was really impressive and not something you'd seen a lot of up to this point, except in, say, Shadows of the Empire, but on a smaller scale, where having characters introduced and showing up between not just different books, but also different comics, games, and even a TV show, characters going between mediums, this is just something you didn't see a lot of in this phase of Star Wars. Kyle Katarn was the biggest Star Wars game character, but it took a long time for him to show up in novels, which weren't just direct tie-ins to his own games. But at the same time, the cohesiveness between things, even directly just within the multimedia project, let alone with the other Clone Wars projects that came later, does tend to get significantly overstated. Let's take Anakin getting knighted, for example.
Oh, good.
There's a fan page dedicated to maintaining different timelines in Star Wars. I'll link to it in the description, but this includes the pre-TCW 2008 Clone Wars timeline, which does a really impressive job collating everything from the MMP, but it points to the fact that Anakin is a knight at the start of Season 1 of the Clone Wars 2008, only a few months into the war, as essentially the crux of why the timeline is now...
It's not a few months. Like I said, according to the Essential Reader's Companion, it's only 4 weeks, which makes no fucking sense.
...broken by that show, arguing that too many stories were predicated on him being Obi-Wan's Padawan too late into the war. But Anakin's knighthood wasn't necessarily even the cleanest bit of continuity within the multimedia project. We have 2 bits of media to look at here, the 2003 show and one of the novels of the MMP called Jedi Trial. Jedi Trial was originally set significantly later into the war, in its final year, and the book is about Anakin being sent on a mission with Nisha Halcyon, funnily enough the grandfather of the aforementioned Corran Horn, as his trial to become a Jedi Knight. It's his success here that prompts Mace Windu and Yoda to grant Anakin a knighthood. In the original animated series, however, Anakin's knighthood is treated very differently. Chapter 21 of the Clone Wars starts with the resolution of the Battle of Hypori, which began in Chapter 20. That episode had introduced General Grievous, showing him winning a really cool duel against a bunch of Jedi including Ki-Adi-Mundi and Kukruk, who became a major player in the comics later on. That battle took place 4 months after Geonosis per the timeline. The next scene...
Okay. What Corey fundamentally... Well, first of all, before I get into this, another question I have to pose to you is when the Anakin knighting with Jedi Trial and what do you call it? The micro series is why not both? They don't contradict each other in the way I think he's thinking they do. So he's doing something a bit disingenuous here. He's saying that, oh, because sequentially the Clone Wars, Anakin's knighted immediately after the Battle of Hypori in the show, that conflicts somehow, when the thing Corey fundamentally does not understand about the micro series is it's cut up into little bits. They were originally TV commercials. The micro series, you can watch it as a 2-hour story and have it, like that's what I did before I went and saw Revenge of the Sith with my wife the other day, because it's in theaters. I watched the Clone Wars micro series and then we went to the theater. So you can sit down and watch it as a whole linear story. But in reality, in the continuity of it, it's chopped up. So I know in the show, General Grievous, just kicked a bunch of ass on Hypori, and then the next scene is them debating about knighting Anakin. That's years later. That's years later. And if you actually watch the show, there's nothing in context, but like, oh yeah, well, there's no like in context dialogue to refute that. It's not like, oh well, yesterday when General Grievous nearly killed Shaak Ti. No. The Battle of Hypori takes place like a year and a half before Anakin is knighted, and either he fundamentally doesn't understand that, or he's trying to omit that to lie to you to make you think that the Clone Wars multimedia project was more fucked up than you think it was. It wasn't.
And shows the Jedi Council discussing the need for more knights, with Ki-Adi-Mundi emphasizing how the reveal of Grievous has really changed the shape of the war. This is why they want more knights. Obi-Wan, in response, suggests Anakin be knighted, specifically foregoing the trials because of everything Anakin had.
It's a combination of this and his actions at Prefacing during Fate of the Jedi, not Fate of the Jedi, during Jedi Trial, that resulted in him being knighted. Again, why not both? It was both. Literally, I don't have it. I used to. I packed it up because I'm trying to move. The New Essential Chronology, it's all right there. And I know Corey's smart. I know he reads. That's why I'm like, is he intentionally being disingenuous here? Don't know.
Demonstrated in the war so far. Some members of the council, like Oppo Rancisis, are outraged at the possibility of forgoing
It's Oppo Rancisis.
the trials. Obi-Wan then references Anakin passing a trial of skill by defeating Ventress on Yavin 4, referencing her as that dark assassin, despite him calling her.
Yes, so he's going and talking about all of Anakin's feats, which again, he's talking about as the war started. He's not talking about, oh, last Tuesday when he fought Ventress. Again, there's a time jump here that isn't inherently showed in the series, but is implied that Corey is trying to trick you into thinking isn't.
Her by her name, and knowing her pretty well in other material set later in the war within the MMB, a trial of the flesh getting his arm chopped off by Dooku, and then every test of courage the war had dealt him. But nowhere in this do they reference...
Yes, okay, so no, he doesn't reference Prefacing, alright? He doesn't reference Prefacing, but he literally said, and every trial that the war has thrown at him. What's the name of the book, Corey? It's called Jedi fucking Trial. That's a trial. That's one of his trials he went through. Holy fuck. Stop being disingenuous.
Since that time he went off with Nija Halcyon in a book that was called Jedi Trial and was supposed to be his trial. But this puts Anakin's knighthood about 4 months into the war in that show. Notably, Anakin still has his...
No, it doesn't, because there's a time jump, you disingenuous person.
Episode 2 hairstyle, as does Obi-Wan. This was very clearly meant by the showrunners to be set very soon after that duel with Grievous. And if you remove it from that
No, it wasn't. There's no context. You're lying, Corey. Fucking come on my stream. Come on my stream. We'll watch it together. We'll watch it together, and I'll point out where you're a fucking liar.
context, parts of the scene just don't make sense anymore.
You're
Like I
being
mentioned earlier
disingenuous.
on in the video, the first 21 chapters of the show cover the first few months of the war, then there's a significant time gap, and the final 4 chapters, 22 through 25, cover the weeks leading up, or even just the week leading up to Revenge of the Sith. So Leland Shee did what I think is a perfectly appropriate retcon for the moment, saying that actually the time jump which occurs between chapters 21 and 22 happens between the Battle of Hypori and the council meeting, and that Anakin's hair was just in a top knot. But while this should be enough for everyone to go about their day and move on, it's still pretty clear what the intent of the scene was.
Alright, okay, so he did explain himself, so I apologize for my outburst. He did explain himself, but he is still lying that it was implied that there is no time jump. He's trying to, like, pull sticks there. That's still a lie, and I'm still going to call you out for that. But I do appreciate you putting in what I said, that chronologically, it's months later.
And it shows that even if the multimedia project was a level of coordination not usually seen between different types of...
Okay. But these tiny little contradictions within the Clone Wars multimedia project pale. They pale in comparison to the shit TCW has done. I could sit here for hours and hours and go through episode by episode every single thing TCW fucked up. But we'll be here forever. I have videos on the subject. Go watch those if you haven't watched them before. Like, it's... Fuck. Stop being disingenuous. It's not overblown. You're trying to overblow the controversy of the small little retcons within the Clone Wars multimedia project and the small little continuity snarls that get when you have any sort of multimedia project, let alone anything Star Wars. Like, even Shadows of the Empire, there were some continuity snarls, and some adaptations of the story told things a tiny bit differently. But you're not sitting here saying that, oh no, that's so bad. No, because everybody recognized that they're little enough to just blow over. The things that TCW did were not little. And you're trying to shift goalposts. You're trying to move blame by overblowing this into being as big as the fucking shit with TCW, and that's disingenuous. Shame on you.
Media that was more about having crossover characters like Ventress and telling the overall story of the war, but not really in a way where each medium cared all that much about the specific plot points going on in the other ones. The show was telling a very different story from what Jedi Trial did. So in some ways, especially on the basis of Anakin's knighthood, this actually makes the 2003 show and the 2008 show fit together better than the 2003 show with the rest of the MMP, at least pre-Leland's retcon. And don't get me wrong, I have no problem with the retcon that Leland made, or retcons in general. Like I've alluded to throughout the video, retcons are kind of what makes the...
everything I was saying was made before Leland made the retcon. Like, it was in the 2006 published Essential Guide to Chronology. You can read that the whole knighting thing was months after Hypori. Like I said, again, he's being disingenuous. He's trying to make it seem worse than it actually is.
Expanded universe go round, in my opinion. But it does set up the funny idea that Coyote has been complaining about Hypori for almost 3 years, with nobody else worrying about Grievous for the entire war. And if it weren't for the retcons, Krook would have stayed dead.
Okay, so just because there's a council meeting where Ki-Adi-Mundi is talking about General Grievous doesn't mean that he's still, like, Hypori was a huge fucking loss. I don't think Corey understands the context. I don't know how much of the Clone Wars multimedia project Corey has actually read, because I'm starting to think he either hasn't read as much as he's claiming in this video, or he's intentionally being disingenuous. And honestly, I don't want to think he's being disingenuous. I don't. Because I like Corey. As much as he fucking hates me, I like Corey. I think he's a great fucking Star Wars Empire war modder. I don't agree with some of his opinions. I don't agree with some of the things he did in some of his mods, but hey, submods. I have a submod that can take out all of the TCW bullshit from Fall of the Republic, and the submod that takes out all the canon bullshit from Thrawn's Revenge. And then Revan's Revenge is all 100% EU, so it's fine. Regardless. Like, I don't want to think Corey's being disingenuous. I really don't, but it's either he doesn't know what he's talking about, which I don't think is the case, because he's a smart cookie, or he's being disingenuous, which I don't want to think he's doing, but I do think he's... It's obvious he's being disingenuous. Just because Ki-Adi-Mundi has been complaining, he has been talking about the threat of General Grievous. General Grievous was a threat. That we can all... The General Grievous in the the Clone Wars Multimedia Project was more of a threat than the General Grievous in TCW. We all know that. That's a universal fact. You don't even have to watch my videos to know that. You just gotta watch the shows. It's obvious that in council meetings, yeah, they would keep bringing stuff up like that. So, I don't know what argument he's trying to make here. Again, grasping at straws.
When Grievous fought him at Hypori, rather than turning out to be alive and granting us the opportunity to see his sweet hat throughout the rest of Star Wars Legends. But now taking a look specifically at those final 4 chapters...
Okay. This is what I knew he was going to bring up. Here's where we're going to go. Because I've already covered this. And it's literally already retconned in the... what is it called? The New Essential Chronology. Literally... Okay. Before we watch this, just keep in mind, if you just put the Battle of Tithe before the mission to Nelvon, everything fits fine. So I'll let him explain, and then I'll do my take.
There are some additional issues between the 2003 show and other Legends novels, specifically Labyrinth of Evil. Labyrinth isn't technically legally part of the MMP, but it is one of the pre-existing Legends Clone Wars novels, and it also tells the story of the lead-up to Revenge of the Sith, including...
So, you need to keep in mind that in the commentary for the 2003 Clone Wars series, which I own, even signed by Anthony Daniels, I own them, I've seen them. So don't take my word for it. In the commentary, Gendy Tartakovsky tells us that the final couple chapters of the miniseries were rushed because George wanted them out a specific time before before Revenge of the Sith, because some theaters would actually screen the final couple chapters of Clone Wars before Revenge of the Sith. So George wanted that out as fast as possible. Labyrinth of Evil was being written about the same time. Now, what you'll notice between Labyrinth of Evil... I know I said I was going to let him explain, but I'm just explaining it now because I know what he's going to do. Labyrinth of Evil and the Clone Wars and the Clone Wars series, there you can see when you read them, there is an attempt for connection. I do believe that maybe not Gendy himself, but maybe somebody else writing for the show, as well as James Lucino, were probably in contact. Or maybe they were in contact with each other through the continuity department like Sue Rostoni. I don't know. But there's evidence in the book and in the show that there was attempts at integration and collaboration. I do think because of the time that Gendy was under, that there was some cuts and that they couldn't quite put it together. I don't know. Read the book for yourself. Watch the excuse me. Watch the commentary of the Clone Wars DVD. Like I said, I own them. I've seen the commentary, and I've used that as research for some of my past videos. But like so. For example, the Ithorian Jedi and the Taltz Jedi, Roran Karab and Fal Mudana, both of those guys appear in the Labyrinth of Evil book. There's a fight on a maglev train, where instead of between Fal Mudana, the Magna Guards, Roran Karab and Grievous and Chak Ti, it's between like Stasali's there. Mace Windu takes a lot more part in the battle, in like the fight with Grievous, than he did in the micro series. But yeah, so while it is a continuity snarl, while it is and you'll see for yourself when he explains it, and I'll call him out if he's being disingenuous. There was an attempt. And it just didn't quite work. But I will say, all of the characters that were supposed to be there were at the right place at the right time. They just weren't doing the things that they were doing in each respective portrayal. Now, if you go by new canon rules, Pablo Hidalgo said that visual mediums trump, written mediums. So you would take the micro series versus Labyrinth of Evil. If you were gonna go by that case, I think both fights are pretty great and have their own merits. Oh, Padme is also on the maglev train too, so that's a little bit of a thing too. But yeah, it's really the only big continuity snarl with the Clone Wars Multimedia Project. Everything else Corey has said in this is bullshit or extremely, extremely minor. But this is the one big one. And like I said, you can reconcile Nelvon and Tithe by just having Tithe take place before Nelvon, and that's how they do it in the New Essential Chronology. And then with the duel with Grievous on Coruscant, that's where things kind of get up in the air. But like I said, all the characters that are supposed to be there, even the minor characters, are there. They're doing things, they're just not doing the same things. So take it as you will.
The kidnapping of Palpatine and the opening of the Battle of Coruscant, something that the 2003 show covers as well. But both of these actually have some fairly significant differences in what different characters are up to during this time period. Part of this, I believe, is because those final 4 chapters were based on earlier drafts of Labyrinth of Evil. But again, the core point here
That's
is
a good
that
point
it's
too.
not like all of
That was
this
a good point.
perfectly...
Perhaps the last couple episodes were based off of earlier drafts of Labyrinth of Evil. Because, like I said, Falmudana and Roran Karab are there. Those are two extremely random characters to just have floating around. Like, Shakti is a bigger character, and even Stasali a little bit, but the Falmudana and Roran Karab had not appeared in anywhere but Labyrinth of Evil. So there's a strong evidence to support that it was either based off of an earlier script, or there was just some delayed communication between the continuity department and Gendy and James Lucino. But I digress.
Mapped out before, and the 2008 show is just the first introduction of contradictions to the Clone Wars timeline. Some of them much bigger, but also some of them much smaller. And none of this, to be even more clear, is to say that the original show or the MMP are bad, or that they should...
He didn't even bother to cover Barasafi. So, here's the thing. If you leave TCW in the expanded universe, Barriss Offee's canonical death within the expanded universe... excuse me. Barriss Offee's canonical death within the expanded universe takes place on Felucia. She gets killed by an ATTE. And I believe this was because there was a deleted scene in Revenge of the Sith. And a lot of the Revenge of the Sith comic adaptation included some of those deleted scenes in there, which her death was one of them. So it's even kind of basically G-canon that Barriss Offee dies on Felucia leading clone forces during Order 66. But if you watch TCW, she was a terrorist that tried to blow up the Jedi Temple. So that begs the question, how does she get to Felucia leading troops when she was just trying to blow up the Jedi Temple? This is something that Corey is specifically not bringing up because he knows that completely destroys his argument. Because he knows that is a huge continuity snarl that kind of makes his claim that the TCW continuity snarl is being overblown null. Because it is null. It's not overblown. Everything I've explained about the controversies with the continuity and TCW isn't overblown. It's 100% factual. You can fucking just read the material. It doesn't make sense. He's trying to make it less. He's trying to make it less so that I don't know if he's trying to make people look more favorably towards... I don't know what his goal of this video is, but I will tell you it's not genuine. It's not truthful. So
disqualify either the 2003 show or other MMP books from being considered legends despite these contradictions. I'm honestly not really a fan of most of the 2008 show or movie for a variety of reasons I won't go into here.
Then why are you doing this, Corey? If you're not a fan of the 2008 show, why are you sitting here like trying to gaslight people into thinking that the controversy wasn't overblown? That to me says you have an agenda, which is based on a like for the show. You know, you're not looking objectively at what I've been literally looking at objectively. And I've called myself out during this video saying like, oh, that's a subjective opinion. I've called myself out saying when an opinion is subjective, but all of the stuff I've been saying objectively, you're not looking into. And I don't think that's indicative of someone who says that they're not a fan of this. Like, I don't understand what your goal with this video is. Is it literally just to piss me off? Like, I don't know. What's your end goal?
Although parts of it have grown on me over time, and I do love Rebels and The Bad Batch. Well, on the other hand, I grew up loving the 2003 show.
You're
but
just a
none of
Filoni
that changes
fan.
the
Just
fact
admit
that the
it.
expanded universe continued on after 2008, and many things did in fact take into account things which had happened in the 2008 cartoon.
Not as many as he's gonna try to get you to believe here.
So the people making what would become known as Legends very clearly thought of it as something they needed to consider, if nothing else. And it's hard to point to any useful definition of what is and isn't canon beyond that. When you start talking about which whole works ought to be included or excluded just because of specific contradictions, especially when they're taken into account by other sources, you're getting into an ever-shifting personal goalpost of just how contradictory things have to be.
You want to talk about shifting goalposts, Corey? What the fuck was this video?
Before you get to that line, and I think no matter where you draw that line, there's more that gets caught up in it than just the Clone Wars 2008 show. Saying that it's the only blight of continuity errors infringing upon an otherwise carefully curated and consistent continuity is really just not an accurate representation.
No, he's right. It's not the only... TCW isn't the only thing that contradicted. There were works before that had some continuity snarls, but most of them were fixed, and most of them were pretty minor. The shit that TCW did, entire planets were rearranged and moved on the galaxy. Entire cultures were changed. Entire characters had their backstories and character arcs either removed or severely altered. Whole timelines shifted. And not to mention the retcons upon retcons to explain other retcons being retconned by retcons that this show created. Like I said, it's not overblown. It's not overblown. And then trying to pick apart the extremely tiny, small amount of inconsistencies between the Clone Wars multimedia project and other works in itself, and then lying too, and trying to come up with, make up your own inconsistencies that don't actually exist if you read and watch the multimedia project in context. You know, I've said everything I needed to say. It's like, it's not overblown, but let's hear his conclusion.
Of what Legends ever was, even just within the Clone Wars. And really, if you think this is messy, let's not even start to think about what a potential sequel trilogy by George Lucas with Darth Maul and Darth Talon would have looked like for the Legends timeline.
I'll agree with him there.
That's going to do it for today, though. Thank you for watching. If there's something else you'd like to see covered on the channel in the future, let me know.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'll have this linked in the description. But closing thoughts on this, it's not overblown at all. It's funny because I've been trying to find time within my busy schedule to do this for a couple days now. Because just when he would commented was just like, oh, I hope you're up to the challenge. Like, this wasn't a fucking challenge. I didn't even need to look at any of my sources. Like, I've been doing this shit for so long. Like, bruh. So it's, I don't know. It's disingenuous to say that the controversy was overblown. I think it was proportional, to be perfectly honest. I think the errors in TCW outweigh the errors in literally all of the rest of the expanded universe. I think there are no continuity snarls as big as the ones that TCW created. And maybe that's subjective, but in my experience, from what I've read, watched, played, the only other media I can think of that has created as much of, problematic-ish retcons would be SWTOR to a small extent, and then maybe Force Unleashed. But really, I can't think of anything that has majorly affected the continuity more than TCW. And I do think a majority of people watching this, or not really watching this, but fans of my channel and of both my channels, really, probably agree with that. Because it's, like I said, I've pointed all this stuff out objectively. And I do think there were some points that Corey here was making that was disingenuous and grasping at straws and trying to pull issues out of non-issues, and I don't know, but like I said, I'm not. This isn't an attack on Corey. This is just me picking apart this video. Like I said, I like Corey. I don't think he's. I don't think he's ill-intentioned, but watching this, I have to wonder, because it's not like a lot of the things I pointed out were kind of disingenuous. Again, grasping at straws, trying to create issues where there are none, and yeah, like I don't know. I think he just dropped the ball with this one, and I don't understand what the goal of this video was if he claims that he's not as big of a TCW fan. But I don't know. Like I said, I think he either is unfortunately being disingenuous or severely lacks understanding of the material, which again is kind of hard for me to believe that he would have a severe lacking of lack of understanding of the material, given like what we've seen on like his videos, and like, well, I don't watch his videos. I don't watch Star Wars lore channels because I do my own, so what's the point? But like his mods, his Star Wars Empire War mods, like the amount of like lore and stuff that's included in there, all the hundreds of different characters and stuff. So I don't know. It's hard to go either way. I don't know. I wish this video wasn't made because it wasn't. His points weren't that great, and some of it was disingenuous and lying. And I think when you have an audience as big as him, it's your duty to not lie, you know. But heyo, that's me. Like, because I don't do YouTube as a living. He clearly does. I don't. I work 2 jobs. I have a wife, and then we've got big stuff coming up. But it's like YouTube's my hobby. It's not my livelihood. So maybe this was just an idea he had to just kind of make a couple bucks. I don't know, put bread on the table. I don't know, but like I said, I think when you have an audience and the subscriber base as big as his, like, you kind of have a duty there, and I don't think he fulfilled that duty in this video. But anyways, well, it was nice to finally put a video on this channel for the first time in a very long time. Links to this video will be put in the description, and then obviously links to my Manda-LORE channel, which I publish videos on regularly, versus this channel, which hasn't had a video in like 7-8 years. No, but anyways, glad I did this actually, because I was kind of like dreading it a little bit too, but then getting into it, I'm like, oh, this is easy. Like I don't even need to get into my shit. Like I was getting ready to like get up and have to go look at my source books and stuff, but it's just like, oh, I didn't even need this. Years of arguing with idiots on the internet, kind of. Not that I think Corey's an idiot. I'm just saying. Years of arguing with people on the internet, kind of. I mean, I know my shit off the top of my head by this point, but regardless, yeah. So like I said, this is probably a one-off thing. Don't expect any more from me on this channel. Keep going over to my Manda-LORE channel if you're interested in lore videos, and if you're not, then okay, whatever, cool. But yeah, thanks for watching, and yeah, bye.
Hey, post-editing Tad here. Just had a couple closing thoughts that I wanted to say when I was recording this over the weekend, but just didn't include, but have come to me now. I don't want this to be like an attack or anything. I'm not trying to attack Corey. I'm not trying to, make this a whole fucking fandom wars thing. I don't want that. So please don't go and harass Corey, and on the other side, don't go to my Manda-LORE channel and harass me. I don't want any of that fandom wars bullshit. like I said, I like Corey. Corey, I think, is extremely talented. I do think with this video though, he was a bit dishonest, and it's like with what I was kind of debunking here, you have to wonder. It's like, do you just fundamentally not understand the material, or are you being dishonest? So it's like I'm kind of forced into a position where it's like I either have to call him out for either being stupid or a liar, and I know he's not stupid, but I don't want to call him either. So that puts me in an awkward position. But just looking at this video, he was arguing a point that is extremely weak. Now, what I will say is he could have made this video and just gone at it from a different direction. He still could have talked about all of the not misconceptions, the inconsistencies within the Clone Wars multimedia project and some of the continuity snarls it had with itself as well as other EU material. Because, as much as, I sat here with this video and I said, okay, yes, that's correct, but, and of course, he also took some things that weren't actually continuity snarls, and then just tried to make them more than they actually were, to kind of prop up his arguments, even though when you actually read the source material, it's nothing, or read or watch the source material rather. The point I'm trying to make is he could have still made the video. He just could have came at it from a different angle. Instead of taking it from the angle of attacking the Clone Wars multimedia project and saying that all the shit with TCW was overblown and it wasn't actually that bad, he could have just not argued that point at all, because it's an irrefutable fact that TCW did some major damage to the timeline. And you've watched me in this video. Every point I've talked about had layers and layers of unraveling. The damage that TCW did to the expanded universe timeline goes very deep. And to say that it's overblown is extremely dishonest. I still think he could have made a video talking about the issues with the Clone Wars multimedia project, but he could have started out with, his intro could have been like, hey, acknowledging that TCW did a lot of damage and that it was controversial. But instead of arguing the point that, hey, it's not actually controversial because look at what the Clone Wars multimedia project did, it could have said, yes, that was controversial and it was very bad and damaging to the timeline. However, the Clone Wars multimedia project isn't perfect and it had its own continuity snarls. That would be 100% truthful. That would not be arguing a disingenuous point. It would be, actually doing a service by, relaying information, which, as I've said I don't remember if I've said in this video before, because I'm actually re-recording this post-editing thing, because yesterday when I exported the video, for some reason this didn't come up. But anyways, like the audio didn't like show up for whatever reason, so I'm re-recording this. But anyways, yeah, like, instead of arguing this point that is just wrong, he could have acknowledged the damage TCW did and that it was controversial, and then segued into, but you know what? The Clone Wars multimedia project had its own issues, and that's perfectly fine. That's truthful. That's, like, as I said, really the only two big things in this video was the issues with Labyrinth of Evil, which I've already explained. Labyrinth of Evil is the big one. That's the one where, like, the continuity snarls aren't super reconcilable. You can do some things with, like, moving around different events. Like I said, the Battle of Tithe before the Battle of Nelvon, and then they go off to Coruscant. And then, but the issue with the General Grievous fight on Coruscant, that's where it comes in. That's where things get screwy. And you kind of have to take one source over the other, which sucks. So that's really the big one. And then the Jedi trial thing, not what he was saying with the supposed time dilation, which, as I've said, isn't an issue because the micro series is kind of cut up into chapters. So, and they aren't all sequential. Like, you can sit and watch, like I've said, you could sit and watch the micro series all in one go sequentially, and it's cohesive, and it's really fun watching it between episodes 2 and 3 because it syncs up and connects everything perfectly. But in the reality, when you're looking at the Clone Wars multimedia project as a whole, the micro series is cut up, and different events take place at different times. Like, for example, the whole thing on Rat Attack with Dooku recruiting Ventress, that actually takes place 2 years before the war even starts. But like I said, when you watch it sequentially, it doesn't imply that, but it also doesn't not imply that too. So it's workable, is what I'm saying, which is more than what TCW is, because you can't work with TCW. You can't rearrange events because everything is sequential and everything references each other. But yeah, like I said, please don't go attack Corey. Please don't attack me. And obviously any video responses to this, I'm not going to respond to. I've said my piece. I want to go back to talking about the expanded universe and how much I love it. I want to go back to talk about the Clone Wars multimedia project and how much I love it and how great it was. And I don't want to focus on negative things. That's why I stopped doing the TCW doesn't fit in Legends videos, which if you watch those, like, you know. But yeah, I doubt Corey's gonna watch this and respond to it. More likely, people on his like Discord will watch it, and then they'll explain to him what I said, probably misconstruing everything I've said here to make it seem like an attack, rather than just calling out bullshit when I see it. But I digress. Thanks for watching, and yeah, have a good day.